The massive council chamber stretched across nearly a kilometer, its crystalline walls reflecting the bioluminescent patterns of dozens of alien species. The air hummed with nervous energy as representatives from 47 different worlds gathered for what many considered the most important trial in galactic history. Some floated in specialized atmosphere bubbles, others perched on adaptive seating that molded to their unique anatomy. The Zephyrian delegates shimmered like living water, while the rock-skinned Mordanites sat motionless as ancient mountains. At the center of it all stood the witness platform, a simple metal structure that seemed almost insignificant compared to the grandeur surrounding it. Yet every eye sensor and consciousness in the chamber focused on the lone figure approaching it with labored steps. Thekvar moved slowly, his massive frame showing the wear of countless battles. Standing nearly 3 meters tall, he represented the Kethmari warrior caste beings, bred for combat across 1,000 generations. His chitinous exoskeleton bore the scars of plasma burns, kinetic impacts, and energy blade cuts. 2 of his 6 eyes had been damaged beyond repair, leaving milky white orbs that seemed to stare into nothing. His left secondary arm ended in a crude mechanical replacement, its servos whining softly with each movement. The silence in the chamber was absolute. Even the usually chattering Pixari delegates had gone quiet, their antenna-like appendages twitching with anticipation. The massive Goliath representatives leaned forward despite their size, while the ethereal Veilthi seemed to fade slightly as they focused their collective attention on the witness. Supreme Arbiter Velenos rose from her position at the apex of the chamber. Her crystalline form caught and refracted the chamber's lighting, creating rainbow patterns that danced across the walls. As the eldest member of the tribunal, she had presided over disputes between star systems for over 3 centuries. Her voice, when she spoke, resonated through both auditory and telepathic channels, ensuring every being present could understand. The Galactic Tribunal recognizes Vekvar of the Kethmari 4th Fleet, she announced, her words carrying the weight of absolute authority. You have requested to provide testimony regarding the events at Proxima mining colony and the subsequent 47-day siege. The court reminds you that false testimony before this body carries severe penalties under galactic law. Vekvar's mandibles clicked in what his species considered a gesture of acknowledgement. He placed his remaining natural hand on the testimony amplifier, a device that would broadcast his words in emotional resonance to every corner of the chamber. The mechanical replacement hand gripped the podium's edge, leaving small dents in the metal. Honored arbiters, he began, his voice carrying the distinctive clicking undertones of his species. I stand before you not as a conqueror but as a survivor. When the Kethmari War Council first received intelligence about human expansion into the Proxima sector, we dismissed it as a minor territorial dispute. These bipedal mammals from Sol 3 had only recently developed faster-than-light travel. They possessed no energy shields, no plasma weaponry, no psionic capabilities. Their ships were crude constructions of metal and ceramic composites. A ripple of agreement passed through several delegations. The Altarians nodded their serpentine heads, while the insectoid Hyveneri clicked their approval. Most species had similar first impressions of humanity. We intercepted their communications, Vekvar continued, his scarred face reflecting painful memories. They used such simple designations for themselves: Honsol, Dayun, Wujin, Soyoung, single-syllable combinations that seemed almost primitive compared to our elaborate naming conventions that incorporate lineage, achievement, and spiritual essence. We analyzed their physical specifications: average height of 1.7 meters, single-chambered hearts, only 2 optical sensors, no natural armor plating, no claws or fangs. The chamber's atmospheric processors adjusted as several species released pheromones indicating amusement. Even now, the basic human form seemed laughably inadequate compared to the evolutionary perfection displayed by the galaxy's dominant species. Our war computers calculated a 97.3% probability of victory within the first solar rotation. Vekvar's voice grew darker. We were 3,000 of the Kethmari's finest warriors, backed by orbital bombardment platforms and gravitic artillery. They had 800 miners, engineers, and civilian contractors with whatever improvised weapons they could fabricate. The mathematical superiority was overwhelming. He paused, his damaged eyes seeming to focus on something far beyond the chamber walls. We expected them to follow standard galactic protocols, attempt negotiation, seek terms for surrender, perhaps evacuate their non-combatants to preserve their genetic line. These are the rational responses of any intelligent species faced with impossible odds. The silence stretched on, broken only by the soft sounds of various species' breathing apparatus, and the gentle hum of the chamber's systems. Even the most impatient delegates waited, sensing that something profound was about to be revealed. Instead, Vekvar's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, forcing the chamber's acoustic systems to amplify his words. We discovered something that still invades my rest cycles, something that has fundamentally altered my understanding of what it means to fight for survival. These humans, these seemingly fragile creatures, they don't merely engage in combat when their existence is threatened, when their packmates are in danger. They undergo a transformation that defies everything we thought we knew about warfare, about sacrifice, about the very nature of consciousness itself. Vekvar's voice cracked as he prepared to continue his testimony. Commander Tehian was their leader, a male who barely reached the height of our juveniles. His uniform bore the simple insignia of a mining administrator, not a warrior caste. When our dropships breached their outer perimeter and our shock troops began the assault, we transmitted the standard terms for honorable surrender. We offered them the chance to preserve their lives in exchange for submission to Kethmire authority. The human commander's response was transmitted on an open channel so all his people could hear. He said simply, "Not today." 2 words that would echo through 47 days of hell. We expected negotiation, prisoner exchanges, the civilized conduct of war as practiced throughout the galaxy for millennia. Instead, we witnessed something that broke every paradigm we held about combat and survival. Their warrior named Jamin was positioned in what we calculated as an indefensible watchtower. Our heavy plasma artillery targeted his position first, expecting to eliminate their overwatch capabilities. The bolt severed his primary firing arm at the shoulder, an injury that would incapacitate any rational being. We watched through our tactical scopes as he switched his weapon to his remaining hand and continued engaging our forces. But that wasn't the part that shattered our understanding. He used his own blood, painting target indicators on the tower walls to guide his comrades. Return fire. His life essence became a weapon against us. Vekvar's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, and the massive chamber fell so silent that even the gentle hum of life support systems seemed loud. His 6 eyes, clouded with pain and memory, stared into the distance as if he could still see the battlefield that had changed everything he believed about warfare. Commander Tehian stood barely 1.7 meters tall. He began, his mandibles clicking with each word. By our standards, he was smaller than our adolescent warriors. His uniform was simple gray fabric, not the ceremonial armor of a war leader. When our dropships descended through Proximus' atmosphere like falling stars, their engines screaming warnings of doom, we expected him to activate the colony surrender beacon. Every civilized species in the galaxy follows the same protocols. When faced with overwhelming force, the alien's breathing apparatus wheezed as painful memories flooded back. Instead, this human male stood on the colony's central platform, surrounded by 800 miners and engineers who had never seen real combat. His voice carried across their communication system, calm and steady like deep water. He said just 2 words that would haunt us for 47 days, "Not today." Several delegates in the chamber leaned forward, their various appendages and sensors focusing intently on every word. Our first assault wave consisted of 300 elite shock troops, supported by gravitic artillery and plasma bombardment from orbit. We had calculated this as a simple pacification operation. The human defensive positions were laughably primitive metal barriers and concrete bunkers that our weapons should have vaporized in minutes. Vekvar's secondary arms trembled as he continued. That's when we first encountered their warrior. Named Jamin, he had positioned himself in an observation tower that our tactical computers marked as the most vulnerable point in their defense grid. Our heavy plasma cannon targeted him first, a direct hit that should have eliminated any threat. From that position, the scarred commander paused, his natural hand gripping the podium so tightly that the metal groaned under the pressure. The plasma bolt struck him directly in the shoulder, severing his primary arm completely. Any rational being would have retreated to seek medical attention. The injury was catastrophic arterial damage, nerve destruction, bone vaporization. Yet through our optical sensors, we watched him do something that defied all logic. The chamber was absolutely silent now, every being hanging on his words. This human switched his weapon to his remaining hand and continued firing. But that wasn't what broke our understanding of warfare. He began using his own blood, his life essence, to paint targeting markers on the walls around him. Each mark guided his comrades' return fire with deadly precision. He was turning his own injury into a tactical advantage, using his pain as a weapon against us. A collective gasp rippled through several delegations. The concept was so alien that even the most battle-hardened species found it disturbing. Then their female fighter Hyjin demonstrated something even more incomprehensible. She had rigged the colony's mining explosives throughout the industrial sector, turning civilian equipment into military assets. When our second wave breached her defensive line, we thought we had her trapped in a dead-end corridor. She was cornered, outnumbered 15-1, with no escape route. Lekvara's voice cracked with emotion. Instead of surrendering, she activated the explosives while still holding them. The blast took 12 of our finest assault troops with her, but it wasn't suicide, it was sacrifice. Her death created a gap in our advance that allowed 30 human civilians to escape to safety. She traded her life for theirs without hesitation. The mechanical arm whirred softly as he gestured, the sound echoing in the silent chamber. These acts of apparent savagery should have demoralized their forces in any normal military engagement. Losing key personnel in such violent ways would cause panic and retreat. Instead, the remaining humans seemed to fight with increased determination. Each loss made them more dangerous, not less. Lekvar's 6 eyes focused on different sections of the chamber, as if trying to make each delegate understand the impossible reality he had witnessed. But it was their Medik Subin who completely shattered everything we thought we knew about warfare and the nature of consciousness itself. His breathing grew labored as he relived the most disturbing memory. She wore the simple white markings of a medical officer, protected under Galactic War conventions. We had wounded soldiers scattered across the battlefield, both human and Kathmari casualties mixed together in the chaos of combat. Standard protocol dictates that medics treat their own species first, enemy wounded only after their own forces are stabilized. The alien commander's secondary arms began to shake more violently. This human female ran directly into our active crossfire zones 7 times. 7 separate occasions where our weapons targeted her specifically. She moved between casualties with no regard for species or allegiance, treating human and Kathmari wounds with equal urgency. We shot at her repeatedly, our plasma bolts scorching the ground around her feet, yet she kept returning to the battlefield. Several council members shifted uncomfortably in their specialized seating, the implications of this behavior clearly troubling them. When our forces finally cornered her in a collapsed bunker, we expected to find her cowering or attempting to surrender. Instead, she was kneeling beside a severely wounded Kathmari warrior, one of our own assault specialists who had been caught in a human explosive trap. She was using her limited medical supplies to stabilize his injuries, speaking to him in broken Kathmari words of comfort. Lekvara's voice broke completely for a moment before he gathered himself to continue. She looked up at us with those strange, small human eyes so different from our multiple optical sensors, said something that still echoes in my mind cycles later. She said, "Please don't shoot while I finish helping him. He's someone's family member too." The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs from various species, their translation devices struggling to convey the emotional weight of the moment. "How do you process such behavior?" Lekvar asked, his voice rising with desperation. "How do you fight an enemy who displays such brutal efficiency in combat, while simultaneously showing mercy to their opponents? How do you break the spirit of beings who seem to draw strength from every loss, who become more unified with each sacrifice?" We had superior numbers, better weapons, orbital support, and centuries of military tradition. Yet we found ourselves facing an enemy that defied every tactical manual ever written. The scarred alien's mechanical hand scraped against the podium as he concluded this portion of his testimony. These humans weren't just fighting for territory or resources, they were fighting for something deeper, something that transformed ordinary miners and engineers into warriors who could not be defeated by conventional means, and that realization terrified us more than any weapon they could have wielded. The siege stretched on for 47 standard days, each one more nightmarish than the last. Lekvar's voice carried a haunted quality that made even the most stoic tribunal members lean forward in their seats. His damaged eyes seemed to see through time itself, back to those terrible weeks that had redefined everything the Keth knew about warfare. "By the 10th day we understood that we were not fighting an army," he began, his mandibles clicking with nervous energy. "We were fighting something far more dangerous, an entire ecosystem that had adapted to survive against impossible odds. The humans had transformed their mining colony into a living organism, and we were the infection it was trying to eliminate." The alien's remaining natural arm gestured weakly, the movement causing several tribunal members to notice how the mighty Kethmari warrior had been reduced to a shadow of his former self. Their chief engineer Dongwu had worked for 36 hours straight, without rest, turning every piece of civilian equipment into a weapon of war. Mining lasers became sniper rifles, or processing plants became explosive manufactories, and the colony's central computer became the brain of a massive defensive network. Lekvar's breathing apparatus wheezed as painful memories flooded back. Every corridor we entered became a death trap. Automated systems would seal blast doors behind our advancing troops, then flood the sealed sections with toxic mining gases. Gravity generators would suddenly reverse, sending our warriors crashing into ceiling-mounted spike traps. The ventilation system itself became a weapon, carrying poison clouds, explosive charges, and worst of all, their scout. The mention of the human scout caused a visible shudder to run through the alien's massive frame. Several tribunal members noticed this reaction, their various sensory organs focusing intently on the witness. The one was her name, Lekvar continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. She stood only 1.6 meters tall, smaller even than their commander. Yet she moved through the colony's infrastructure like a ghost, appearing behind our lines so frequently that our troops began to develop what human psychologists call paranoid delusions. She would strike at our supply convoys, disable our communication arrays, and vanish before we could respond. The Scout commander's mechanical arm scraped against the podium as he struggled to maintain his composure. Our sensors could not track her movements through the ventilation systems. She had memorized every shaft, every maintenance tunnel, every hidden pathway in the colony. She would emerge from air vents directly above our positions, drop explosive charges, and disappear again within seconds. Our best hunters, warriors, trained to track prey across entire star systems, could not find her. A ripple of unease passed through the chamber as delegates began to understand the psychological impact of such tactics. By the 15th day, our troops were reporting impossible sightings. The one was supposedly seen in 3 different sectors. Simultaneously, impossible unless she possessed teleportation abilities. Our soldiers began to fear the very air they breathed, knowing that death could drop from any ceiling vent at any moment. Sleep became impossible when every shadow might conceal an enemy who struck without warning. That Var's voice cracked as he continued. But the physical warfare was nothing compared to their psychological assault. It began on the 11th day, when we first heard their death songs echoing through the colony's communication systems. Beautiful, haunting melodies that spoke of sacrifice and honor, broadcast on every frequency we used for tactical coordination. The alien's 6 eyes seemed to glaze over as he relived the memory. The songs were not in any language our translators recognized, yet somehow we understood their meaning. They spoke of love for family, of duty to protect the innocent, of the glory found in giving one's life for others. These were not war chants designed to intimidate enemies, they were farewell songs, sung by warriors who had already accepted their deaths. Several tribunal members began to fidget uncomfortably, their various appendages twitching with nervous energy. Their warrior Borum had been critically wounded during our assault on the colony's power station. Our medical scans showed that he had lost 40% of his blood volume and had suffered massive internal trauma. By all biological laws, he should have died within minutes. Instead, he continued fighting for 6 hours, his voice growing stronger even as his body failed. Lekvar's breathing became labored as he approached the most disturbing part of his testimony. We watched through our combat visors as this dying human sang his death song while single-handedly holding off an entire squad of our best warriors. His voice carried through the station's speakers, joined by other wounded humans who added their voices to his. The melody was so beautiful that some of our own troops stopped fighting just to listen. The chamber had fallen completely silent except for the soft hum of translation devices struggling to convey the emotional weight of the alien's words. When Borum finally fell, his song did not end. Other humans took up the melody, each adding their own voice to the chorus. Even as our weapons tore through their ranks, they continued singing. The songs became a constant presence, a reminder that each human we faced was willing to die for their cause. Lekvara's secondary arms began to tremble violently. By the 20th day, we had lost more troops to fear and despair than to human weapons. Our soldiers began to refuse direct orders, something unthinkable in Kethmari military culture. They spoke of nightmares where human voices sang them to their graves, of enemies who fought like demons but died like heroes. The alien commander's voice grew quieter, forcing the chamber's acoustic systems to amplify his words. Our warriors reported impossible contradictions that broke their understanding of reality. They would capture human prisoners who had been setting deadly traps just hours before, only to watch these same enemies share their meager rations with wounded Kethmari soldiers. The humans would tend to our injured with the same care they showed their own wounded, then returned to combat with renewed determination. Vekvar's mechanical hand left deep gouges in the metal podium as he concluded this portion of his testimony. How do you maintain military discipline when your enemy defies every logical expectation? How do you convince warriors to fight when their opponents show mercy to prisoners while simultaneously designing elaborate death traps? We found ourselves facing beings who could be both angels and demons within the same solar cycle, and that contradiction began to destroy our forces. From within, the haunted alien's voice echoed through the silent chamber as he prepared to continue his testimony about the psychological warfare that had ultimately defeated the mighty Kethmari military machine. That Varus' massive frame began to shake as he approached the most devastating part of his testimony. His 6 eyes, usually capable of independent movement, all converged on a single point in space as if he were still standing on that collapsing space station, 38 days into the siege. The tribunal chamber, filled with representatives from 47 worlds, had never been so silent. Day 38, he whispered, his voice barely audible even with the chamber's amplification systems. We had finally broken through their last line of defense. The mining station's central core lay exposed before us, its blast doors torn apart by our gravitic cannons. After more than a month of the most brutal fighting any of us had ever experienced, victory was finally within our grasp. The scarred alien's breathing apparatus struggled to maintain rhythm as painful memories flooded back. Our assault teams had suffered 60% casualties, losses that should have been impossible against such inferior opponents, but we had them cornered. The humans had nowhere left to retreat, no more tricks to pull from their seemingly endless supply of tactical innovations. Vekvar's natural hand gripped the podium so tightly that stress fractures appeared in the metal. The station's infrastructure was failing around us. Plasma conduits had ruptured, sending streams of superheated gas through the corridors. Structural supports groaned under the weight of battle damage, and the artificial gravity generators flickered on and off like dying stars. Oxygen was venting into space through dozens of hull breaches, creating a howling wind that carried the scent of death through every passage. Several tribunal members leaned forward, their various sensory organs detecting the genuine terror in the alien's voice. That's when our forward scouts reported something impossible. In the station's central hub, where the main evacuation pods were located, they had discovered a single human coordinating the departure of non-combatants, not their military commander, not one of their seasoned warriors, but a young female child named Hayrin who appeared to be no older than 12 standard years. The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs from various species. The concept of a child in an active war zone violated the fundamental laws of every civilized society. In the galaxy, she stood barely 1.4 meters tall, Vekvar continued, his voice cracking with emotion. Her clothes were torn and stained with blood not her own, but from the wounded she had been treating. In her small hands she held a datapad that contained the evacuation protocols for over 200 civilians and, impossibly, 43 Kethmari prisoners of war. The alien's secondary arms began to tremble as he relived the most shocking moment of his military career. The evacuation bay was chaos. Humans rushed toward the escape pods while structural collapses sent debris raining from the ceiling. Emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red shadows, and the constant wail of proximity alarms made communication nearly impossible. Yet this tiny human child moved through the pandemonium with the calm efficiency of a seasoned commander. Vekvar's mechanical arm whirred softly as he gestured, trying to help the tribunal understand the impossibility of what he had witnessed. She was personally checking each escape pod, ensuring that weight distribution was optimal and that injured passengers were properly secured. But what broke my understanding of these creatures was that she was treating our captured soldiers with the same care she showed her own people. The scarred commander's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Our prisoners' warriors who had spent weeks trying to kill her friends and family were being helped into the escape pods by this human child. She spoke to them in broken Kethmari, apologizing for what she called the crude medical treatment they had received. Her pronunciation was terrible, but her meaning was clear. She was sorry that they had suffered. Several council members gasped audibly as the implications of this behavior sank in. One of our captured warriors, a veteran named Krestal, had been severely wounded during the fighting. He massed nearly twice what this human child weighed, yet she was personally carrying him toward an escape pod. His injuries were fractures, internal bleeding, severe burns from plasma exposure. Any rational being would have left him behind to save multiple lighter passengers. Dachvar's breathing became increasingly labored as he approached the moment that had changed everything. I confronted her directly, demanding to know why she was risking her life and the lives of her own people to save enemy combatants. The station was collapsing around us, structural integrity failing by the minute. Every second she spent helping our prisoners was a second that could have been used to save human lives. The alien's 6 eyes all focused on the same point as he relived the conversation that had shattered his worldview. She looked up at me with those strange, small human eyes so different from our multiple optical sensors, so vulnerable and exposed, and she said something that still echoes in my dreams. Because you're someone's family too. The chamber fell into absolute silence as the weight of those words settled over the assembled delegates. In that moment, I understood something that terrified me more than any weapon these humans could have wielded. Bekvar continued, his voice growing stronger with conviction. Human brutality and human mercy are not opposite traits, they are the same adaptation. The same instinct that drives them to fight with such savage efficiency also compels them to show compassion to their enemies. They are not cruel or kind, are simply the most successful survivors the galaxy has ever produced. The scarred alien's mechanical hand scraped against the podium as he struggled to maintain his composure. This child, this fragile little being who should have been protected in the safest part of the colony, had chosen to remain in the most dangerous location to ensure that enemy prisoners escaped safely. She was willing to die for beings who had spent 38 days trying to kill her people. Vekvar's voice cracked completely as he delivered the most devastating part of his testimony. When the final structural collapse began, she pushed the last escape pod's launch button manually, ensuring that Krestal and 6 other Kethmari prisoners reached safety. The pod's emergency systems engaged just as a massive support beam fell across the launch bay. She saved their lives at the cost of her own evacuation route. The chamber erupted in shocked exclamations from multiple species, their translation devices struggling to convey the emotional impact of this revelation. That's when I realized we had never been fighting an enemy army, Bekvar concluded, his voice barely audible. We had been fighting a species that had evolved to protect others, even at the cost of their own survival. Every act of apparent brutality served a purpose. Every sacrifice protected someone weaker than themselves. They were not monsters wearing the masks of saints, they were guardians who had learned to fight like demons to protect what they loved. The haunted alien's testimony had reached its breaking point, and the tribunal chamber struggled to process the implications of what they had heard. The massive chamber remained frozen in stunned silence as Vekvar prepared to deliver his final testimony. His scarred form seemed to shrink before their eyes, as if the weight of absolute truth was physically crushing him into the floor. The mighty Kethmari warrior who had once stood 3 meters tall now appeared diminished, broken not by battle wounds but by the devastating realization of what he had witnessed. Honored arbiters, he began, his voice carrying a tone of resigned acceptance that made even the most hardened military delegates lean forward in their seats. I stand before you today not as a conqueror seeking glory, not as a victim demanding justice, but as a messenger bearing the most important warning this galaxy has ever received. The alien's breathing apparatus struggled to maintain rhythm as he gathered the strength to continue. For 47 days, we analyzed every human tactical decision, every strategic movement, every act of apparent brutality. Our war computers processed millions of data points, searching for weaknesses, patterns, anything that would explain how 800 miners had held off 3,000 elite warriors. Vekvar's mechanical arm gestured weakly toward the assembled delegates. We missed the most crucial detail, the one fact that changes everything we thought we knew about these creatures. Despite their seemingly savage methods, despite acts of violence that shocked even our battle-hardened troops, the humans never once violated the galactic conventions of war. The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs that rippled through dozens of different species. Translation devices worked overtime as delegates struggled to process this impossible claim. Every single engagement was recorded by our combat systems. The scarred alien continued, his voice growing stronger with conviction. We reviewed hundreds of hours of battlefield footage, searching for evidence of war crimes, of the barbaric behavior we had witnessed firsthand. Instead, we discovered something that shattered our understanding of warfare itself. HFY's 6 eyes swept across the tribunal, making contact with representatives from every major military power in the galaxy. Their warrior, Minho, the human we watched decapitate 3 of our soldiers with a primitive metal blade, was not engaging in senseless butchery. Our tactical analysis revealed that those 3 Kethmari were in the process of executing wounded prisoners in violation of military law. His brutal action was the only way to stop a war crime from being committed. Several military delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their various appendages betraying nervous energy. Their sniper Yunji eliminated 47 of our finest troops over the course of the siege. 47 confirmed kills that turned her into a legend of terror among our forces. Yet when we analyzed her targeting patterns, we discovered something remarkable. She never once fired on medical personnel, civilian contractors, or wounded soldiers attempting to retreat. The alien's secondary arms began to tremble as he continued. We had assumed she was simply a skilled killer, but the truth was far more disturbing. Every shot she took served a tactical purpose beyond simple elimination of enemy forces. She targeted our communications specialists to protect human evacuation routes. She eliminated our heavy weapons operators to prevent civilian casualties. She was conducting precise surgical strikes designed to minimize overall bloodshed. The voice cracked with emotion as he approached the most damning part of his testimony. We called them brutal because we couldn't comprehend their efficiency. We labeled them savage because we couldn't understand the depth of their sacrifice. These humans were not fighting for conquest, for resources, or for glory. They were fighting for survival in the most literal sense, not just their own survival, but the survival of every innocent life in their care. The scarred commander's mechanical hand scraped against the podium as he struggled to maintain his composure. The humans don't wage war like other species in this galaxy. They don't fight for territory or honor or political advantage. They wage war like extinction is the only alternative to victory, like every battle could be their species' last stand. The chamber had fallen into complete silence, broken only by the soft hum of life support systems and the occasional click of translation devices. The truth that haunts my rest cycles, honored arbiters, is the most damning indictment of our own conduct, HFY continued, his voice barely above a whisper. In 47 days of combat against 800 humans who should have been easy prey, they maintained their honor better than we maintained ours. They showed mercy to enemies who had shown them none. They protected the weak while we deliberately targeted non-combatants. The alien's breathing became labored as he prepared to deliver his final, devastating revelation. Our own tactical records show 17 separate incidents where Kethmari forces violated the galactic conventions of war. We targeted medical facilities, we executed prisoners, we used civilian shields. Yet these humans, these supposedly primitive creatures, never stooped to our level despite facing impossible odds. HFY straightened his massive frame with visible effort, his multiple eyes sweeping across the tribunal one final time. We convinced ourselves that their mercy was weakness, that their compassion was a tactical disadvantage we could exploit. Instead, we discovered that human mercy and human brutality spring from the same source: an absolute refusal to allow innocents to suffer while they still draw breath. The scarred alien began his slow, painful journey toward the chamber exit, his damaged leg servos whining with each step. The sound echoed through the vast space like a mechanical funeral dirge. We didn't lose to superior weapons or better tactics. He called back over his shoulder, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustic systems. We didn't lose to human brutality or savage cunning. We lost to human humanity, their unwavering commitment to protect others even at the cost of their own lives. HFY paused at the massive chamber doors, his scarred form silhouetted against the bright corridor beyond. And that, honored arbiters, is perhaps the most terrifying weapon in their arsenal. They fight not because they love war, but because they love peace. They kill not because they enjoy death, but because they cherish life. In a galaxy full of warriors who fight for glory, they have proven that the most dangerous opponents are those who know exactly what they're fighting for. Massive doors began to seal with a deep, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate through the very structure of the chamber. As the gap narrowed, HFY's final words echoed through the space with prophetic certainty. Mark my words, honored arbiters, humanity will either become this galaxy's greatest protector or its final conqueror. Either way, they will reshape everything we thought we knew about warfare, honor, and the true meaning of strength. The doors sealed shut with a resounding clang that seemed to punctuate the end of an era. The Galactic Tribunal was left in stunned silence, grappling with a truth that would fundamentally alter their understanding of the small, seemingly fragile species from the third planet of an unremarkable star system. The humans had won not by abandoning their principles in the face of overwhelming odds, but by holding on to them when it would have been easier and perhaps more logical to let them go. In a galaxy filled with species that had evolved to be bigger, stronger, and more technologically advanced, humanity had proven that the most dangerous fighters were not those with the best weapons or the strongest armor, but those who knew exactly what they were fighting for and refused to compromise their souls in the process. The revelation would spread throughout the galaxy within days, carried by the fastest communication networks known to galactic civilization. Some species would see humanity as a threat to be eliminated before they grew too powerful. Others would seek them out as potential allies, recognizing the value of warriors who fought with such unwavering honor. But all would remember the testimony of Thekvar, the broken Kathmari commander who had learned the hard way that sometimes the most terrifying enemies are those who refuse to become monsters, even when facing monsters themselves. The end.